Today, we are going to continue with the argument that we have initiated while going through the essay, The Archetypes of Literature. And we have seen that what Fry is talking about. And he says that if you want to search for archetypes, and search of archetypes is a kind of literary anthropology. And this literary anthropology is concerned with the way that literature is informed by pre-literary categories such as rituals, myth, and folktales. And even pointed out and said that we next realize the relation between these categories in literature. And all these things are reappearing in greatest classics. And it is a general tendency that great classics revert those pre-literary categories because if we don't use, if we don't understand that how these pre-literary categories have helped us to understand and realize the relation with the feeling that the study of somehow, if we try to study a mediocre art, however energetic that mediocre art may be, but it always remains at periphery. And a masterpiece seems to draw a point which can see enormous number of patterns of significance. We can find it out in those great classics, in those masterwork. Moving further, Fry pointed out that this inductive movement, because if you remember a little bit, you will find out he talked about these things with two sorts of movement, and he classified it in inductive movement, which is purely structural analysis, where you will find out the things can be brought together, the things can come with structural analysis. And second one is a deductive way where he will able to find out how the criticism as a subject is having a complete sense. So this inductive movement towards the archetypes is a sort of process of backing up from structural analysis and archetype in a structural analysis is having a sort of process of backup. And here Fry used an example of painting where we find that Aristotle also used example of painting. Even Sidney also used the example of painting when he is comparing with poetry. So Fry says that if we want to have a backup from painting, if we want to see composition instead of the brushwork, when you watch any painting, you are not looking at what sort of brushwork is done there, how this brushwork is there. When we watch a particular paint of art, we used to watch the whole composition of that painting. We never say that, okay, this sort of brush is used, this sort of brush is making this composition so successful. We overall look at the composition. That is a structural analysis. This is how you analyze the thing. If it is with in regard to the painting, then it is also related with literature, because you need to understand the structure. You are looking at a composition. Fry gives an example of the very famous Shakespearean play Hamlet. And he says in Hamlet, he points out one particular very prominent scene of Hamlet, that is gravedigger scene in Hamlet. Fry says, for instance, in the foreground of the gravedigger scene in Hamlet, there is a verbal texture that appears in the play. The verbal texture ranging from puns of the first crown to the Yorick sort of dance macabre soliloquy. The whole verbal structure is coming in front of us before that gravedigger scene in Hamlet. And this is how we study the text, that it is appearing before the very prominent you can say scene of a play, the verbosity that Shakespeare used before bringing that serious and severe philosophical scene, gravedigger scene from Hamlet. Now, if you go a step back and see that there are groups of critique which Fry name, that there are Wilson Knight and Spurgeon, Spurgon. This is a group of critics, Shakespearean critics. And these Shakespearean critics, they are simply listening to the steady rains of images, that images are coming continuously. Images of corruption, images of decay in Denmark. Shakespeare, how he projected the corruption and decay before the gravedigger scene appears in the play. The critics are finding out these particular things, the issues which are somehow a common reader cannot able to locate it. Because for a common reader like us, it is the verbosity, puns, and from puns ranging to a soliloquy, Danse Macabre of Yorish soliloquy, that the whole things are coming in front of us, but from the critic's perception, it is the rain of images of corruption and decay we find it. Now, here too, as the sense of the place of this play or of this particular scene in the whole play, it begins to dawn on us we are in the network of psychological relationships before that particular scene. We are trying to find out psychological relationships, and which is the main interest of Bradley. Bradley is also Shakespearean critic, A.C. Bradley, who wrote a very famous book called Shakespearean Tragedy. The Bradley, a critic, trying to find out the psychological relationship before that particular scene. Wilson Knight and Spurgeon, these critics, they are trying to find out the images that are coming into the scene. And we, as a reader of the play, when we read a printed text, we find something different from the same play. That means our perception is something different. Our understanding is something different. While looking at the whole thing, whether it is the reader's perception, whether it is Wilson Knight's perception, whether it is Bradley's perception. If you see why Fry is giving these three different examples, because why he has not said all the critics, but there are groups of critics. Spurgeon and Wilson Knight, they belong to that group of critics who used to find out uh, social institutions and role of socio-political role in Shakespearean plays. They used to work from that perception. A.C. Bradley looks at the humanitarian and psychological perception. So every critic worked on different platforms. And Fry is trying to say that when we are talking about all those things, we forgot the basic thing. And the basic thing is that we are forgetting here the genre. That Hamlet is a play, and it is an Elizabethan play. It is not only a play, it is an Elizabethan play. We forget the genre while we are analyzing all those things. So Fry says again we have to go a step back. And we have to see that the group Stoll and Shaw group, this is another group of performers. They used to perform play. We have seen from reader's perception, we have seen from critic perception, we have seen from a psychological critic perception. Now we are looking at performer's perception. How a performer would able to see this particular idea. Now Stoll and Shaw, they see the scene conventionally as a part of its dramatic context. The scene is coming continuously in the whole process of action. So performer will never able to find out that there is certain rain of images of corruption and decay, or there is a psychological relationships. This is not the perception of any performer. Performer looks at a play from the angle that it is a play, Elizabethan play, and how it has to become, how the scene should come in the context, with its dramatic context. Fry again say, if you go one step more, and we can begin to glimpse the archetype of the scene. As he said in this scene, the heroes, he used a very typical German word in the essay. The word is Lebestod, Lebestod, Lebestod. It's a German word, which is a where you do not find any satisfactory word in English for it. But its equivalent meaning is something the convergence of love and death. That is the equivalence meaning of that particular word. And this word is particularly related with performance. It is used mostly. It is associated with the Wagnerian opera, Liebestod. And Liebestod, it is completely related with the performance uh, in an opera. There's a conversion between love and death, convergence of love and death. Hamlet is in that position. And Fry is trying to convince us, Fry is trying to tell us that how these archetypes will help us to understand the whole scene, as we have seen, as we have observed it, that this scene is analyzed from a reader's perception, the critic's perception, the psychological perception, even the performer's perception. And he says that what is the condition of Hamlet at that time? Hamlet has a declare of his love to Ophelia, unequivocal declaration of his love, his struggle with Laertes, and sealing his own fate in the play. I'm not going to explain the whole play. And the sudden sobering and seriousness in his mood that brings the grave digger scene into the play. This is what happened before the grave digger scene. You can see in Hamlet. Now, all these things, that his unequivocal declaration of love, his struggle with Laertes, Ophelia's father, killing, and then sealing his own fate, and then getting very serious and so somber in of his mood, and then the scene of digging of a grave, and the philosophical discussion between the grave digger and Hamlet takes place. Now, if you look it very clearly, my friends, Fry pointed out that all that takes back return to the genre. And when it is returning back to the grave, which is opened, which is almost opened on the stage, we need to understand this at each stage. That this scene, we are dependent on certain kind of scholarly organization at each stage of understanding. This is the whole process of a scene. That's what I have suggested. A grave opened its mouth like yawning, and Hamlet is talking with that grave digger. The whole scene If we want to understand, we are dependent on kind of scholarly organization. What we require, we need first an editor to clean up the text for us, to make us clean, to make us understand very easily. Then the rhetorician or philologist that used to explain the meaning and the undercurrents of the words. Then literary psychologists are explaining the relationships. This is what we have seen. Printed text means editor works there. Then Wilson Knight, that is philologist and a rhetorician. Then comes A.C. Bradley, literary psychologist. Fry claimed that we cannot study the genre without the help of literary social historian, the literary philosopher, and the student of history of ideas. And for the archetypes, we need literary anthropologist. These four members are required to understand the genre. But now, what Fry says that once we have established a pattern of criticism, central pattern of criticism, once we have established, all these interests, literary social historian, literary philosopher, history of ideas, literary anthropologist, all these can be covered in one term called literary criticism. You did not to study all the things separately. You can understand, you can get the things, you can know the things under the term called literary criticism, because we have established criticism as a science. We know that what sort of science it is, how it works, what are the methods we adopt. Now, all these interests are seen as converging on literary criticism instead of residing from it into psychology and history and the rest of the things. In particular, the literary anthropologist who chooses the source of Hamlet. What is the source of Hamlet? If you try to find it out, the source of Hamlet, the literary anthropologist can able to find it out. The literary anthropologist is interested in finding and dealing with the source of Hamlet. The source of Hamlet is from the pre-Shakespearean play in Saxo. Used to say Anglo-Saxon period. If you remember, if you know, if you read some history of English literature, Anglo-Saxon period. In Saxo, the period of Saxo. The period of Saxo is full of, you can say, nature myths. Saxo is full of nature myths. And it is not running away from Shakespeare. He is drawing closer to the archetypal form which Shakespeare has recreated. Remember what he said, Fry, earlier, that great classics revert the pre-literary categories, ritual, myths, and folktales. So this great play, Shakespeare has reverted the nature myths that Saxo used in the story of Hamlet. And Shakespeare is drawing closer to that particular myth. He's trying to show those myths that used in Saxo once again in Hamlet. And a minor result of our new perspective is that there's contradiction amongst critics and assertions that this, not that critical approach is right one. Because we used to counter each other. We used to react each other. Simply not following, simply not accepting the perceptions of others. And one show a remarkable tendency to dissolve into unreality. So if this is what happens, that you try to induct, try to bring out all the things together, you are not able to reach to one particular perception. So Fry said that let us see the second way. Please remember, as I said you in the beginning of this essay, that Northrop Frye is treating criticism as a science. And if you know a little bit of science, science is always following trial and error method, where they used to do it, and if it is successful, then we have adopted. Where if it is not successful, we never follow it. So the two methods, inductive method, deductive method. So inductive method, here say if you try to induct it, then there is little bit of a new perspective, and is that contradictions among the critics. If you try to study it from all these different perspectives, literary social historian, philologist, and rhetorician, then you require uh, literary psychologist, then you require history of ideas. And if all these things are coming into criticism, then you are not able to reach to one particular uh, understanding of that text. You need support of so many persons to understand that particular text. So he's saying that let us apply, let us use the second method called deductive method. Let us see how this deductive method works. Now, Fry, while initiating the second method, deductive method, he said some arts move in time, like music. I'll explain it afterwards. And others are presented in space, like painting. Now, in both the cases, the organizing principle is recurrence. Recurrence. which is called as rhythm when it is temporal, when it is in time, when you consider it in time, like music, it is called as rhythm. And when it is spatial, it is called as pattern. When you listen, when you talk about music, it runs in time. You play it in time. And painting is in a space, particular frame. And when it you find out recurrence takes place, and that's why you can have a length of it, the width and the size of it. So rhythm and pattern, these two words. Rhythm is temporal, pattern is spatial. Thus, we speak of rhythm of music and pattern of painting. But later on, to show our sophistication, we may begin to speak of the rhythm and painting. We can speak in the way that rhythm of painting and pattern of music to show our sophistication. You can say, in other words, all arts, this is what statement by Fry, all arts may be conceived both temporally and spatially. The score of musical composition can be studied all at once. Once you listen a particular musical composition, you can study it. Okay, this is what musical composition, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour. You can study it at once. A picture may be seen as the track of an intricate dance of the eye. Your eye is looking at the whole picture by the whole film frame, and you're looking at it. This is how music and painting. Music, you can study all at once. And painting, with an intricate dance of your eye, you can look it, you can try to complete, take the view from your eye, you want to capture it. So I claim that literature seems to be intermediate. Literature seems to be intermediate between music and painting. Literature seems to be intermediate between music and painting. Because in literature, words form rhythm. Words form rhythm, which approaches or which approach a musical sequence of sound at one of its boundaries. A B B A. These are the uh, meter you use, pattern of rhythm, the sounds And the sequence of sounds reaches at its boundaries, and those words form an image, word form a pattern, certain particular pattern which creates a sort of image, pictorial image in front of the reader. When you read a novel, when you read a drama, when you read a poem, certain patterns of words are used. Those patterns of words approach the pictorial image at the end of it. That means literature is trying to bring both the things together in itself. On one hand, with the form of rhythms, words form rhythms, and which reaches to, which approach to a musical sequence, and at one end and at the other end you will find out forms a pattern which create an image. Now if you get close to these boundaries, one is of rhythm and other is of pattern, you find out that it forms a main body, and it forms a main body of what is called as experimental writing. It forms a main body, experimental writing. We may call the rhythm of literature the narrative, and the pattern the simultaneous mental grasp of verbal structures, the meanings or its significance. Both the things are taking place. The narrative which appears in literature is carrying its own rhythm, and the pattern of the words simultaneously mental grasp of the verbal structures, the meaning of that word, the significance of that word. It is not that when you try to read any work of literature, you are simply going through dictionary and finding out meaning of each and every word. Although some words are difficult to understand for its meaning, we try to get it in with an intelligence guess. But we never try to close the book and open the dictionary and find out the meaning and try to apply that meaning to that particular thing, because we know the significance of that particular word, because why this word is been there. While going through the sentence, you can able to formulate, you can able to find out, you can able to reach to some sort of meaning of it, closer to what the literal meaning, closer to that what dictionary used to show the meaning of that particular word. That means nobody is here to make you to understand both the things, rhythm and pattern. With the narrative that is coming in front of us, we are able to understand that it is a rhythm that this literary work of art is carrying with itself in the form of narrative. And when the words you try, the pattern of the word that is appearing, not all the times that the grammatical pattern is followed, still you can able to understand the meaning of that particular sentence. You can able to understand the use of that, significance of that particular word is there. Fry says, that we hear or listen to a narrative, but when we grasp a writer's total pattern, we see what he means. Because you cannot able to understand, how can you able to understand the pattern that is followed in that particular literary work of art if you are not able to read the complete text in front of you? Now here nobody comes to tell you that what it means by. Simply reading the one scene from Hamlet cannot make you to understand what the whole Hamlet means by. Or reading one part or one or two, 3 pages or 10, 15 pages of any fiction does not help you to understand the what the novelist is trying to give you, what the novelist is trying to mean by that particular literary work of art. Now, if this is the thing that we understand, the temporal and spatial use of language, nobody is here to support you, but you understand it. Some may take some time, some can understand very quickly. Some may take some times to understand. Some can understand very quickly. That is there. Depends on the way they grasp. But what we hear to a narrative, but when we grasp the writer's total pattern, that means both the things are essential. Both the things are important if we want to get the total meaning of that particular text. Otherwise, it is difficult for us to get the total meaning of that particular text. Now, Fry moved further and say that the criticism of literature is much more hampered by the representational fallacy than even the criticism of painting. What is representational fallacy? The meaning that the text itself is giving to its reader. The criticism somehow, that is what Fry is claiming, that trying to represent it in a different way. Criticism is trying to represent it in a different form, in different manner. And that's why if you see in inductive way that what he said, that there are 4 different things. Literary social historian, he is explaining the meaning of the text from his perspective. Philologists and rhetoricians are explaining it in their own perspective. Literary psychologist is showing the relationships in his own perspective. The history of ideas are coming together and trying to give us the different perspective. That's why literary criticism is not at all finding out its own meaning, that the text is trying to give it to its reader. Every text is trying to deliver his own meaning to the reader. But what happens? Reader, if he understands the rhythm that the narrative carries and the pattern that he grasps, that what writer is trying to formulate it with the specific use of word, then we can able to get the meaning of it. But we are, after getting through the critical way, by going through criticism, we are trying to move away. It is, we are trying to get a different sort of meaning of it, and that is what he said. It's a representational fallacy that criticism is trying to hamper. This hampered the understanding because of the representational fallacy. They are representing it in a one particular direction. Something like in criticism of painting, what it represents do not matter more. It matters more about how and which form it is related with. And then this is what most of the time happens with us, that we are trying to put it in one particular category. That's why Fry is clearly saying that that is why we are apt to think of narrative as a sequence of representation or sequential representation of events in an outside life. My life is something different. I'm looking at a sequential representation in the life of the protagonist. This is not happening in my life. This is not taking place in my life. What happens with Hamlet, what happens with Othello, what happens with Oedipus, it is not happening in my life. But I'm looking into the sequential representation in another's life, outside of life. That is why we are apt to think of narrative, that we used to think this narrative. That's why we can understand that this is a fictional work. And the meaning coming out of it as a reflection of some external idea. We are looking at outside life, and the meaning it is giving to us is nothing but a reflection of some external idea, not internal. If you use properly in a critical term, an author's narrative is his is in his linear movement. Author's narrative is his linear movement. His meaning is the integrity of his complete form. You cannot find out meaning without going through a complete form. The meaning is related with the form. Similarly, an image is not merely a verbal replica of external object, but any unity of structure, verbal structure seen as a part of total pattern or rhythm. You have to see it in total. Verbal structure is related with pattern and rhythm. You cannot remove it. You cannot say that it is merely a replica of certain things. No. Fry is trying to build up that how the letters the author spells in his words with form of some part of his imagery, though you cannot say it in a special case as it can be noticed. He is not mentioning it in a special case to be noticed by the critics. Fry says narrative and meaning thus become respectively, to borrow musical terms, melody and harmony, context of the image. Melody and harmony. These musical terms you can use for narrative and meaning, which is used to context the whole image or imagery pattern. How this imagery pattern is constituted. How this criticism hampered the representational fallacy is much more hampered by the representational fallacy. How he used this deductive method will continue it in tomorrow's lecture at our routine time.